Sorry, that was loud. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Hello. Welcome. On behalf of Professor Ayad Al-Kazaz Endowment, I would like to thank you for joining us for tonight's presentation titled Palestine, Islamophobia, and the Structural Demonization of Palestinians by nationally and internationally acclaimed scholar of Palestine and Islamophobia, Dr. Hatem Bazian. My name is Dr. Sahar Razavi. I'm the director of the Iranian and Middle Eastern Studies Center here at Sacramento State, as well as an assistant professor of political science. This event has come together with the collaboration of numerous departments and organizations. Excuse me, apologies for my voice. If you notice how long the list of co-sponsors is, I would like you to know that it is because of Dr. Bazian's profound importance as a scholar, a leader, and a mentor. First, I would like to extend my deep gratitude to the incomparable Professor Ayad Al-Kazaz for his generous support and tireless efforts on behalf of Middle East Studies at Sacramento State and the Sacramento Arab and Muslim communities for the past 5 decades. He was one of the very first founders of Middle East Studies here at Sacramento State. I also want to sincerely thank our co-sponsors, the Department of Humanities and Religious Studies, the Department of Women's and Gender Studies, the Department of Geography, the Iranian and Middle Eastern Studies Center, the Palestine American League, our campus chapter of Students for Justice in Palestine, our brand new Faculty for Justice in Palestine, the Palestine Arab and Muslim Caucus of the California Faculty Association, and last but most certainly not least, the Sharif Family Foundation. We are truly grateful for your support. I also want to extend my gratitude to Erica Cessna from the Department of Political Science and to Joshua Bobin, our IMESC's intern for this semester, for their outstanding work in bringing together this event. I also want to acknowledge and thank our representation from the President's Office here at Sac State, Dr. Mark Wheeler, for being here. Thank you very much for joining us. We appreciate it. Dr. Hatem Bazian is a decolonial Islamic scholar who centers Islam's epistemology in all his work and examines the contemporary world through the global South lens. Dr. Bazian is known as an organic intellectual, a term used for scholars who directly connect their work and scholarship to people and are not confined to academia's walls of separation. He is the author of 5 books on Palestine, Islamophobia, and colonialism, numerous book chapters and peer-reviewed journal articles, hundreds of press articles, and constant academic contributions and engagement across the globe. He's also a leading scholar in the Islamophobia studies field. He is the founder of the Islamophobia Studies Center, editor-in-chief of the Islamophobia Studies Journal, and co-founder and current president of the International Islamophobia Studies and Research Association. Dr. Bazian is a lecturer in the departments of Middle East Languages and Cultures and Asian Diaspora Studies at the University of California, Berkeley, and the co-founder of Zaytuna College, the first accredited Muslim liberal arts college in the United States. Between 2002 and 2007, he also served as an adjunct law professor at Boalt Hall School of Law at the University of California, Berkeley. At the community level, Dr. Bazian is the president of Northern California Islamic Council, co-founder of American Muslims for Palestine, and the chairman of the Muslim Legal Fund for America. As you can see, Dr. Bazian's contributions to our academic and cultural understanding of Islam and Islamophobia and to scholarship on Palestine are immense. It is a deep honor, personally and professionally, to host Dr. Bazian tonight after, I have to say, many, many years of following his work. Today marks the 199th day of the assault on Gaza. We are watching in real time the commission of war crimes and man-made suffering, including mass starvation, collective punishment, and genocide. I know I don't need to tell the people in this audience tonight what is happening in Gaza and what has been happening to Palestine for the past 76 years. At the same time, here in the United States, we are at what appears to be an apex of pro-Palestine solidarity organizing on college campuses across the country, to which university administrators have responded in a variety of ways, some with silence, some with principled redoubling statements of commitment to academic freedom, and some with severe repression, unfortunately. At Columbia University, just in the past few days, the campus has been shut down and the New York Police Department deployed to stifle protests for Palestine. Just this morning, at the University of Michigan, they erected their own encampment for Gaza, demanding that the university divest from companies that provide arms and surveillance technology to Israel. Encampments have also just been established at Yale, New York University, the New School, Tufts University, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, Emerson College, and Rutgers University. The political climate in higher education is growing more vocal and more active around the Palestinian cause, spurring conversations about academic freedom and the role of universities in social movements. Academic freedom is the lifeblood of what we do here at the university. It is also an issue with which Dr. Bazian is intimately familiar. It is in this context that we bring you tonight's event, which we hope will contribute to conversations about Palestine, Islamophobia, and who we are collectively in this crucial moment. After Dr. Bazian's presentation, we will have time for audience questions. For the question and answer portion, we are going to distribute note cards throughout the auditorium so that you can write your questions down. Towards the end of the talk, we will collect them and I will synthesize the questions and present them to Dr. Bazian. I also want to call your attention to a book display in the back of the hall, where we have compiled some books on Palestine, Islamophobia, and decolonization for you to peruse after the talk. There's also some water back there. Please feel free to help yourself. You'll also find a reading list containing more titles than what we have here in the hall. Please feel free to take a copy of the reading list, though the books are from the library, most of them, so they have to stay here. We also want to ask respectfully that you do not record the lecture without permission, out of respect for the speaker and fellow audience members. Now I would like to welcome to the podium my colleague and friend, Ms. Amna Salameh, a lecturer in Sac State's Department of Humanities and Religious Studies and co-founder of the Islamophobia Education Collective. With an extensive background in education, Ms. Salameh has served in various capacities to provide training and expertise on Islamophobia in education and curriculum. She has also known Dr. Bazian for more than a decade. She will share more about Dr. Bazian's role as a mentor and as a pillar of the community. Warm welcome to you again, and thank you so much for being here.
Hello, everybody. Assalamu alaikum. May God's peace be upon you all. Thank you, Dr. Razavi, for the introduction. My name is Amna Salameh, and I've had the honor to work with Dr. Hatem Bazian for a few years now when I began my studies on Islamophobia 10 years ago. I never dreamt of finding an academic who concentrates all his studies on Islamophobia, on the topic of Islamophobia, and that's especially because of my own background. I was born to Palestinian immigrant parents in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and my life changed when I decided to wear the headscarf during my undergrad years at Louisiana State University. I remember that all of a sudden, people started treating me differently, and they basically were judging my character and my identity. So I was really shocked by that. And then people suddenly made assumptions basically about my character and identity. And we even had groups from Mississippi that drove specifically to aggressively attack us in Free Speech Alley after I restarted the Muslim Student Association pamphlet table. I knew something was very obviously wrong in the country that I thought was very democratic and all about freedom of expression. I knew something needed to be done to fix the problem of Islamophobia, but was unsure how. Fast forward a few years, I had gotten married and moved to Sacramento, and I did my master's degree here and focused my research on countering Islamophobia through education. and more specifically training public school teachers on the topic of Islamophobia. While I was doing my research, I doubted myself along the way for support on the importance of this project. But in 2014, I found out about Dr. Hatem's academic work on Islamophobia and the existence of an annual Islamophobia conference where different academics would have space to present their research and share their ideas. You can't even imagine how relieved I was to find this. It was like a gold mine. I finally felt like I wasn't alone in my journey. And upon my graduation from Sac State, Dr. Hatem was a mentor and resource that I turned to for many issues. He allowed me to shadow his class on Islamophobia at UC Berkeley, which was really, really awesome, and it was full. He connected me to countless like-minded researchers and academics and reinforced my beliefs that Islamophobia was a bigger structural and perpetual problem in society. I then joined Dr. Hatem's think tank, the Islamophobia Documentation and Research Project, IRDP, at UC Berkeley, and would drive to Berkeley to our meetings where we would have different groups focus on various research projects. It was really nice. We were like a family. Everybody was working on something. I focused on education, Islamophobia and education. We had a group work on a project, a report on Islamophobia in India. Someone else was working on Islamophobia in healthcare. And then we even had somebody do, I think, Islamophobia in gaming. Dr. Hatem even gave me the opportunity to also present at conferences on Islamophobia, which was really intimidating, but he knows how to push people. And since he had like really big scholars come from all over the world, I was so nervous, but I was like trying to keep it together. So I also had a recommendation from Dr. Hatem about a program on critical Muslim studies, which I'm very excited to attend this summer in Spain. These are all a testament to Dr. Hatem's forward vision and support for female scholarship. One of the biggest lessons I learned and heard from Dr. Hatem over the years is the importance of data collection and reporting. He would always say, if you didn't report it, then it didn't happen. I only realized how important this was like this year when as a result of joining the Addressing Islamophobia task force here at Sac State. Because when we're sitting in our meetings and thinking about how to address Islamophobia on campus, we have to look at reports and data that has been published by UC Berkeley. And if we didn't have these reports and the data, then we wouldn't know what to go by. Like this is literally what we look at to find definitions, to how to do, policy change, all these things which are really, really important. Dr. Hatem has been one of my biggest influencers, and seeing his example motivates me in using my voice in academia to be a vehicle for change, despite at times feeling helpless and hopeless. In addition to Dr. Hatem's scholarly excellence, his humility and humbleness is one of the main reasons that I and others look forward to working with him. Anyone who knows Dr. Hatem knows that he has an extremely busy schedule. He's doing his own research, he's publishing books, he's traveling locally and internationally to talk about Islamophobia, to talk about Palestine, and all these important topics that we see that he's very famous for. But unlike many others, he would respond to emails, give individualized advice, has emotional intelligence, can connect to all age groups, is a very non-judgmental person, knows how to get people's attention with his engaging talks, and truly cares for all humanity. There are very rare qualities to find. These are very rare qualities to find in famous academics who sometimes lose sight of the purpose of education. Dr. Hatem reminds me of a quote by the journalist Chris Hedges on the purpose of education, being to develop compassion and making the world more humane. Hedges says, and I quote, "We've bought into the idea that education is about training and success, defined monetarily, rather than learning to think critically and to challenge. We should not forget that the true purpose of education is to make minds, not careers. A culture that does not grasp the vital interplay between morality and power, which mistakes management techniques for wisdom, which fails to understand that the measure of a civilization is its compassion, not its speed or ability to consume, condemns itself to death," end quote. As you all know, Dr. Hatem Bazian is also Palestinian. His identity as a Palestinian American professor who is not afraid to stand for truth and justice has caused many prominent Islamophobic and anti-Palestinian voices to attack him. As a Palestinian American in academia myself, I've looked to Dr. Hatem as a role model and guide to show that as Muslim and Palestinian Americans, we must use our positions and experiences to expand the discourse and diversity of viewpoints that belong on college campuses. Like many Palestinians in the US, I felt like I couldn't share my frustration and pain surrounding the dehumanization of Palestinians without repercussion. For decades and more, explicitly over the past 6.5 months, the dehumanization of Palestinian people has been normalized. But over 25 years ago, Dr. Hatem had the foresight to establish Students for Justice in Palestine, SJP, and American Muslims for Palestine. Dr. Hatem has dedicated his life to be a voice for Palestine and is a common face that you will see, organizing, planning, and leading protests, giving us all the space to share our collective pain about Palestine, which is also necessary to as an outlet for our coping, thus ensuring that the narrative of the Palestinian people is heard in California and around the world. At Sac State's recent annual Multicultural Education Conference, Dr. Farima Pourkourched from University of San Francisco asked us to do an activity to see what it might look like to honor our grief by looking at our ancestors' experiences and what they may have wished for our generation. I closed my eyes and I thought of my intergenerational trauma as a Palestinian, my great-grandmother Amna, who I've had the pleasure to meet. She actually started smoking when she was like 95, who I was named after. I would have imagined her telling me that I must always keep our identity strong, tell people about our beautiful land, tell people about our home, tell people about Palestine. And today's talk is exceptionally important to all of us here in this room. We normally have to drive to the Bay Area to hear Dr. Hatem speak, but we're very fortunate and honored in welcoming Dr. Hatem Bazian to our campus. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Hatem Bazian.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you, Amina. Thank you, Sahar, and Iyad. Thank you for the invitation. We go a long way. I think, Iyad, you presented in at least 3 of the Islamophobia conferences. So look forward, and we also were in the same conference in Qatar, in Doha. So it's really a very small world that we are in. San Francisco State as well. So thank you for the invitation, and thank you for really all the sponsors that made this possible. I know the challenges and the difficulties of having a program on Palestine, especially at this critical juncture in our history. So my talk today is Palestine, Islamophobia, and the structural demonization of Palestinians, and you will get to why it is a structural element. Now, many of you are looking at the picture up there, the first Muslim president, and he happened to be Palestinian. The fact that they felt the need to demonize Obama by putting a headscarf, Palestinian headscarf, tells you that there's a long history of this discourse of demonization. This part began after he gave his talk, his lecture in Cairo, where he critiqued Israel and called for end of settlements. And one of the major lines of attacks on Obama is that he is a closet Muslim and that he was essentially abandoning Israel. So from that point on, we see the intensification of Islamophobia. And at that point, actually, I created the project to begin to actually document Islamophobia. Not 9/11. 9/11, we had a spike, but literally the Obama campaign and presidency began to actually have Islamophobia being monetized at the ballot box, with 2010 election being a critical juncture in the history of Islamophobia in the United States. I always like also to begin with Martin Luther King. One of the critical speeches, all of speeches of Martin Luther King are critical, but one of his most critical speeches is the one, 3 Evils of Society, literally almost 6 months before his death. where he pointed to us the evil of materialism, militarism, and racism. And as we know, they have not went on vacation. They continue to be with us as we speak. He said, cowardice as the question, is it safe? Expediency as the question, is it politic? Vanity as the question, is it popular? But conscience as the question, is it right? And on some positions, it is necessary for the moral individual to take a stand that is neither safe, nor politic, nor popular. But he must do it because it is right. So speaking on Palestine and speaking on Islamophobia, it is because it is that which is right to do today, especially at a time where we see the consequences of silence, which is genocide. Now, in 2021, we did a survey in the Islamophobia Studies Center to ask, we had 1,614 respondents to this survey. And we said, as a Muslim, I feel Islamophobia is taken seriously by civil society, corporate, and political leadership. The data is overwhelmingly close to 88% of individuals who responded said that Islamophobia is not taken seriously. And we still see that people actually till today still don't take Islamophobia seriously because they conflate defending Muslims with actually defending Islam per se. Islamophobia is not about a discourse about Islam or Islamic governments or societies. It's actually the racialization or targeting Muslims as a racial group. And in this sense, engaging in aspects of exclusion, sometimes might lead to violence in some cases, but in general, it is the racialization of Muslims, and people get to be racialized on their religious identity. You don't need to go far to understand that racialization can take many forms. We asked the question, I feel that the media coverage of attacks directed at Muslims is covered fairly and equally. Almost again, 87% between strongly disagree and disagree. Muslims, when they are attacked, including in the current period, right? We have Wadia Fayoumi in Chicago, a 6-year-old that gets stabbed 26 times, and there is no reference to it, including the president actually said that he spoke to the father of Wadia, even though he didn't, right? To have a president standing there on a microphone and saying that he spoke to the father of a 6-year-old, while he didn't, then he had to be alerted. So after the fact, he actually calls Wadia. So again, media coverage, when violence attack directed at Muslims, they usually don't get covered, right? And that has been the case. So today, we're close to 40,000 Palestinians have been murdered in a genocide. And the conversation today in the New York Times, they have 3 articles about the threat of anti-Semitism in college campuses, and not a single story about mass graves in a Nasser hospital, where actually they dug up the mass graves in there. Not a single story in the New York Times, which is the newspapers of record. As a Muslim living in the West, North America and Europe, and we also included Canada, I feel more strongly insecure and afraid for my family and kids, 30%. Somewhat insecure and afraid for my family and kids. So literally we're talking about 80% of Muslims that responded don't feel secure, all right? Meaning they're your colleagues, the one that you are working with, the person that maybe in the next office to you, next to you, or the person that you go out to lunch, they feel insecure. They don't know whether their neighbor actually is looking suspiciously on them and sees something, says something, and they call the police because they're suspecting that there is weird people coming and possibly weird smells. They have not got used to, spicy food, so they actually call. Actually, this was the case that people actually called having suspicion from their neighbors, right? So people, again, Muslims feel insecure for themselves and their kids. The rise of right-wing political discourses and Islamophobic organization contribute to violence against Muslims. So 76% strongly agree, 16.91 agree. So you're literally talking about in the 90 plus individual see the rise of right-wing political discourses, because many in the right-wing political discourses conflate that the Muslims, right, are coming to take over the country, right? I don't know if you know the conspiracy, which also touches on Obama as the closet Muslim, that Obama was posited as being a member of the Brotherhood movement, and they took over the White House, right? So this is the theory. It's almost Clark Kent and Superman. Right? It has to be a Kenyan person from Africa 50 years ago, right? Planning to migrate to the United States, spending the time in Kansas to scan around and find the right white woman, right? Making sure to impregnate her. The way not to raise suspicion, he needs to divorce her and then send the kid and his mother to Hawaii so they would actually be chill, right? And then when he grows up, Clark Kent Superman, they come back to Chicago to actually get what you call the rightful credentials. You work in the social welfare program. Then you need to get the stamp of Harvard, Clark Kent. And in a short period of time, they take over the White House. Well, Muslims are taking over the White House. If such people did this, I want to meet them, because we can't fix the streets. And to think that this is the replacement theory, and actually people buy it. Still, a considerable segment of the American public believe Obama is a Muslim. They have not seen Jeremiah Wright, his preacher in Chicago, and they still believe that this was a takeover of America. Right? That's why this whole notion of taking America back, right, literally taking our country back, comes into this discourse. I believe, and I said it at the time, that people who wanted to use the M-word, Muslim, on Obama, really wanted to use the N-word, but they felt comfortable because the public discourse was acceptable to be racist toward Muslims, and therefore they could not use the N-word. But as the M-word became easy and comfortable to say, people came back to use the N-word. And that's where we are right now. So you can actually make almost a straight line in the discourse. Now, this is one of the issues that we have. When speaking about Palestine in the society and professional setting, as a Muslim, I feel, right, somewhat discouraged and ostracized for it, and strongly discouraged and ostracized for it. So literally, almost 72% feel that when they speak about Palestine, they completely are ostracized. We're running right now another survey, especially in the tech industry, to see how in the tech industry, because the tech industry says we're open and so on. Actually, the data shows both speaking on Palestine and also speaking about Hindutva, meaning Hindu nationalism, are two issues that are highly, highly censored, and people are unable to speak about it. Now, the term terrorism is used equally to describe all violent events targeting civilians for political purposes. Again, the data disagree and strongly disagree is almost 85%. So when we say the term terrorism, it's almost immediately correlated with being Muslim and increasingly also being Palestinian. If you don't notice, and Muslims will tell you this, whenever we hear a violent attack on TV, when the person says we are not sure if it is Muslim related, meaning they're not sure it's Muhammad or Khalid. Not the fact that somebody actually killed multiple people, because as you know, America, we are the most violent society, all right? We have far more mass shootings, right, than actually the days of the year. On an average, 48,000 Americans die annually as a result of gun violence. And just to be sure, none of these are named Muhammad or Fatima. But the TV, whenever they report, we're not sure that it is terrorism related, meaning they are not sure that it is Muslim. Not the fact that there is actually a violent intent and mass shootings that is occurring. So the term terrorism literally is exclusively used relative to identification of Islam and Muslims. As a Muslim in Western society, I feel a great sense of belonging and inclusion in society, but only 2%. A lot of belonging and inclusion. Most, at least the majority, feel a sense of little belonging and inclusion. Today, increasingly in the DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, we talk about sense of belonging. Muslims don't get a sense of belonging, right? And again, I want you to raise your hand. When was the last time that your manager, your university actually sent you a Ramadan greeting and sent also for you to donate to Muslim charity? Now, I know we get on Christmas, right, the season of giving, and we get a Christmas greetings or holiday greetings, and here's a list of things to donate. So even something very small that could actually go a long way. We're not asking for a full-on belonging. There's different ways where that belonging can be expressed. So Muslims don't feel a sense of belonging and inclusion in the society. So as we speak about diversity and equity and inclusion, we need to think beyond symbolic, right, inclusion. Now I want to shift a little bit to ideological underpinnings. Anybody knows Clash of Civilization? Okay, our favorite Clash of Civilization, Huntington. In page 20, he says, there can be no true friends without true enemies. Unless we hate what we are not, we cannot love what we are. Now, you need to understand that Huntington writing was based on Bernard Lewis's thesis. He wrote it first as a foreign affairs article in 1993, and then he developed it into a full book. His thesis basically saying that clash of civilization, we have a clash of civilization with the Muslim and the Chinese, Sino-Islamic civilization. And as such, what he is calling for, literally, is for the Western world to recommit itself to, quote, Western tradition and Western civilization. Now, I argue in here, Huntington is placing or putting Western civilization on its head. If we say that the Western civilization is based on the Judeo-Christian tradition, most of the Christian tradition is based on love, right? So much so that God loved the human, he sent his own son to be sacrificed. Again, this is the basic Christian, right, theology. And as such, even within the Christian tradition, love thy enemy. So you actually have to express love for the Muslims if you actually want to have a deep reservoir of theological understanding. But Huntington in here is literally playing games by actually saying that the way for us to reach our self-love is to find an object for our hate. This is literally ideological underpinning for military-industrial complex, for the corporate world, for continued expansion of the status quo. Because you cannot, after the Cold War, all of a sudden close the door after you have a massive military budget. So we went out to search for an object of our hate, and the Muslim world became a convenient depository for us to rally our base in the society, to rally our society. So Huntington Clash of Civilization is a foundational piece that begins to be used around policymakers. And unfortunately, some people within civil society have bought into this, and they begin to reflect this discourse of Clash of Civilization. Now we see this reflected again in Obama, the material that has been developed, right? The New Yorker having this front cartoons, right? The third jihad, a wake-up call for America. If you notice, it's Obama's eyes, and in front of him, this Arabic. So this is the third jihad that we need to pay attention to all these Muslims that are in civil society that are coming to us in sophistication and taking over our country. And you have also a whole host of discourse that begins to seep into our civil society with a heavy focus on Palestine and Palestinians. So just to understand the dynamics in what is taking place. Now, Palestinian American boy killed and his mother injured after landlord stabbed them because they were Muslim, authorities say. Now, this is immediately after October 7th. His landlord is a 70 years old man. Almost a month before, he was actually making a tree house for Wadia. And it is literally the media coverage and the stalking of literally Islamophobic, anti-Palestinian content that makes this elderly man take his knife, goes to the door of Wadi' and his mother, first stabbing the mother, and then stabbing Wadi' 26 times. So literally what we need is to take account of what media discourses take or undertake in order to create this animosity that people will act on this violence. Similarly, 3 Palestinian students aged 20 shot in Vermont. They were just walking after a Thanksgiving dinner, right? And literally the person saw them wearing the Palestinian headscarf and immediately began shooting them. One of them became disabled as a result of this shooting. So again, to think about the public discourses and seeing the Palestinian, Muslims, and Arab as the other and acting upon it. Now, this is just closer in here. At UC Berkeley, walking into the campus, this is around 2017, all the campus was postered with these posters, terrorist supporters UC Berkeley, myself, another student, and Judith Butler, who happens to be Jewish. Right? So the campus was flooded with these posters. These posters also were dropped on my street on both sides of the windshield cars were placed in there. The university did not say a word. That a faculty member, that a whole attack is taking place. They send a statement that you wouldn't know whether it was your sandwich was cold when you ordered it or something. Literally, it's completely a neutral statement that you don't know what happened. The mayor of Berkeley said this is expression of free speech, right? That we can't do much about it. Meaning calling a faculty member, 2 faculty members in there and another students as terrorists is actually something that would be accepted as free speech, and the whole campus was plastered with it, and the university did not take out the posters. Some of the students went and took the posters out as a result of this instance. This was also was taking place. These were posters on my windshield and the windshield of all the cars in my street. Simultaneously, Rebecca Volkerson, who is the executive director of Jewish Voice for Peace in New York, at the same time, they actually targeted her street. That tells you that this is not a small operation. I know student organizers where it's very difficult to get $300, $400. You could get a bake sale, you could get all this just to make such operation. Such an operation is a massive amount of resources, and I will get to that later on to understand what is taking place. A similar campaign was directed at San Francisco State University. Rabab Abdel Hadi, who is the director of the Muslim and Arab ethnicities and diaspora studies in ethnic studies. And literally for the past 10 years, she has just faced an avalanche of attack, and the university was not helping nor actually aiding or providing support. Going a little bit much earlier, UC Irvine, the Irvine 11 controversy was a controversy following a protest staged by students against a speech given by Israel's ambassador, Michael Oren, at the University of California, Irvine. This was an instance where the 11 students were charged criminally. Now, I'm gonna just give you an example. I have been organizing in the Bay Area and nationally. There isn't a building at UC Berkeley except I have a sit-in or a protest, whether for Latin American solidarity movement, anti-apartheid movement, coalition on homelessness. Had to, literally we walked twice from San Francisco to Sacramento for budget cuts and education. Never in my history, after blocking all this, had I faced criminal charges. The worst that the university have done is to have a hearing where you could actually do what you call additional service for the campus. It is only when you actually deal and critique Israeli policy that the university apparatus, including criminal charges, as that are filed. And the 11 students had to face criminal charges, conspiracy, including the police going to their homes, accessing all their information and their. So double standard in here. And again, I have enough record of this to actually point to this double standard. We get to anti-Palestinian racism, which we need to define to understand. Anti-Palestinian racism is a form of anti-Arab racism that silences, excludes, erases, stereotypes, defames, or dehumanizes Palestinians or their narratives. This is a definition that was developed by 3 of our colleagues, and they have also issued a full report just 2 days ago that defines this phenomena that we're dealing with. I also have a definition of anti-Palestinian racism is a type of Islamophobia rooted in Orientalism, again, the work of Edward Said and Jack Shaheen, that seeks to silence, if you think about USC, removing the valedictorian speaker, something that I experienced when I was the president of the student body at San Francisco State University, where the president removed me from the speaker list at the time, right? Because he thought that I would be too radical in my speech. San Francisco State, and you're talking about being radical, is like, the longest student strike in the history. So silence, intimidate, demonize, surveil. Palestinians, Arab Muslims are heavily surveilled. Right? I often say laughingly that being a Palestinian is stimulus to the economy because there's so many people employed to just monitoring you. Right? So again, surveil and sanctions structural state repression of all expressions of Palestinian identity, culture, and political speech. If you think about the student Malak Afne in UC Berkeley Law School, she was invited to a dinner at the dean's house with his wife as a university-sanctioned event, right? So she begins to speak. What would have been possible if the dean and his wife, Professor Fisk and Shermansky, allowed her to speak for 3 minutes, right? What would be, I would say, if I was in Fisk or Shermansky, say thank you, Malak, for your speech. We disagree with you, but thank you for coming here. It's the end of Ramadan. We wish you a happy Ramadan, and we welcome you to break your fast. That would have been a leadership, rather than Professor Fisk actually going and trying to grab Malak from the back and to grab the microphone. It's a moment of failure of leadership. That's what I see it, right? No matter what you agree. So if you think about USC, Tabassum, she's going to have about 3 minutes, maybe 4 minutes. What she's going to say, I call Israel as an apartheid state. Again, you have CNN always speaking positively. You have the Speaker of the House. You have the President. It's trying to actually suppress any speech. And in suppressing speech, you lose credibility. You lose the epistemic moment. And that's essentially what is happening today. We're facing a tipping moment in the history of both campuses and political landscape in America, that people are trying to silence mere speech that is critical of Israel, because Israel is no longer defensible. You cannot defend, and there's a sizable number of Jewish Americans that are no longer able to defend Israel. Right? So in silencing them, actually you're losing more ground rather than gaining ground. Now, form of anti-Palestinian racism, denying the Nakba and justifying violence against Palestinians, right? Meaning that the Nakba did not happen. There are people who say the Palestinians left on their own. Even the term Nakba is being seen as saying the Nakba is a sign of anti-Semitism. It's just like really incredible the length of discourse that is taking place. Failing to acknowledge Palestinians as an indigenous people with a collective identity, belonging and rights in relation to occupied and historic Palestine. Literally, there are people saying there's no such thing as Palestine or Palestinians. So you're telling me Zionism, which was formed in Europe and migrated and took over Palestine, can be spoken of as indigenous, while the Palestinians in there who have been there, you're actually saying that they're literally don't belong, they're not there. You could disagree with me. You could say, well, you lost the war, we take over land, end of the story. But to deny the existence of Palestinians and failing to give any acknowledgement is a level of what I consider double standard and hypocrisy that we need to be aware of. Erasing the human rights and equal dignity and worth of Palestinians. We Palestinians believe all people are created equal. There is no two different people. There's no three-eyed people, three-legged people. All men are created equal. Men and women, endowed with their dignity, endowed with their right, endowed for justice and freedom. It's not only Palestinians as Muslims, Christians, and Jews. It is on the other side that they need to make that argument. It's on the other side to make that argument of erasing the human rights of Palestinians, right? And again, we already see the possibility of genocide in the International Court of Justice. Excluding or pressuring others to exclude Palestinians' perspectives, Palestinians and their allies. Right? The constant attempt to push Palestinians out. Right? The constant attempt to try to actually bring somebody that is acceptable. Somebody that possibly you will include, but they cannot speak. Right? That this notion of excluding them from this moment. Defaming Palestinians and their allies with the slander such as being inherently anti-Semitic, a terrorist threat, sympathizer, or opposed to democratic values. Right? So literally each Palestinian that is speaking nationally has been taunted, demonized with this type of broad brush. So much so that even as we speak today, if you speak pro-Palestinian or on the rights of the Palestinian, you immediately said that you're pro-Hamas or you're pro-terrorism. At UC Berkeley on the plaza, people were taunting students who are active, saying ISIS, calling them ISIS. Right? This is taking place as we speak, right? Putting other voices speak for Palestinians. Right? Putting other voices speak for Palestinians, not as a way of what you call, let's get other voices in sympathy, but actually we can't include the Palestinians, so we need to bring somebody else to speak for you. All right? Again, this has become almost unacceptable, but that's part of forms of anti-Palestinian racism. Now, another data set that just came out just 2 days ago from this data. Have you experienced anti-Palestinian racism either directly or online? So 64% experience anti-Palestinian racism, whether directly or online. Experienced form of anti-Palestinian racism. Have you experienced silencing, exclusion, harassment, physical threat or harm, or defamation while advocating for Gaza and or Palestinian human rights? Again, about 64% saying yes in terms of their experience. And Tabassum is literally the quintessential example as we speak of being silenced and excluded, the valedictorian. Now look at what happened in USC, right? Not only they first removed Tabassum, but the other speakers said they're not coming. So now they had to cancel all of the speakers just to appease that Israel is not critiqued in a public forum. Right? The level of people think that this is actually intellectually or academically acceptable. Right? What happened to the notion of open debates and open discussions, democracy and academia is not only to take the position you agree with, but actually to be able to listen to the position that you disagree with. Have you felt alone or isolated in your concern about Palestinian human rights? 73.5% feel, again, alone and isolated in relation to their concern. Now, you could, raise your hand if you had this experience. Most often when you actually have a discourse with people, the conversation immediately shifts to talking about terrorism, right? Literally, you're talking to an individual in a few minutes. Literally, they ask you about your position about terrorism, Hamas, ISIS, Osama bin Laden before that, as if Muslims, Arab Palestinians don't have any life other than thinking about your insecurity. So even in terms of what are the modes of conversation that takes place, it literally shifts immediately to this, or most often about women and hijab. All right, which is again, if you've ever read Edward Said, that's just like preoccupation. You would think that Muslims are sitting around and thinking about how we could go and shop at Prada for a hijab because that's where all of our concerns. So the conversation literally about Orientalist frame of minds and Orientalist framing relative to Palestinians, Arab, and Muslims. Have you witnessed others experiencing anti-Palestinian racism either directly or online? 87.9, 88% have experienced or witnessed or experienced anti-Palestinian racism. What is interesting is that people witness anti-Palestinian racism and they don't come to express themselves as allies. which really is one of the most atrocious way to actually witness a racist attack on an individual and your allies, or those who pretend to be allies, co-workers on, being silenced at that occasion. Self-censorship and fear. Are you afraid to speak about what is happening to Palestinians in Gaza, for Palestinian human rights in general? Again, 55.3% are fearful to speak. And Arundhati Roy says the only moral thing Palestinian civilians can do, apparently, is to die. The only legal thing the rest of us can do is to watch them die and be silent. If not, we risk our scholarships, grants, lecture fees, and livelihoods. And therefore, the Palestinians have to be the perfect victims, which means literally to accept their victimization, because they are the victims of literally the Western world, victims to that could not actually be deserving of our empathy and our understanding. So Arundhati Roy again is touching on this fact that many of us are silenced or choose to be silent because there are too many things that we are actually often thinking about. Side of anti-Palestinian racism settings on social media or email, literally on a daily basis, the amount of anti-Palestinian racism I receive is just like literally, I send it to the university, I send it to CARE, I send it to ADC. And just to give you the sense, I even get death threats, and the university response often they give me a stress pamphlet, how to manage stress. And literally, this is where what you call a gun hair cross is placed in my mailbox, and what I get from the police is a stress pamphlet, how to handle stress. That's as far as the type of support in the news. I said in a slow day, you have maybe 6 anti-Palestinian, anti-Muslim, anti-Arab stories in the news on a slow day. On a busy day, the whole news is just about you. All right? So literally from beginning to end, and often some people feel that they're sophisticated. That's the one thing, and they think that they're sophisticated because they're asking this question. I don't know if you watched Piers Morgan. Right? Piers Morgan thinks that he's sophisticated because the first question he asks any person, do you condemn Hamas? Right? And rightly so, the comedian, what's his name? Bassem Youssef asked him, did you ask that same question to an Israeli who actually came asking the question about the violence that have been committed against the Palestinians? And Piers Morgan says, oh, I am providing a platform. A platform of silencing is not a platform. And the fact that you're actually trying to get more clicks and shares because you think that you could jump on this bandwagon, right? This actually individuals who literally are thinking that they're sophisticated in this. So the news cycle is filled with this type. Now, this is actually what you find in social media, all right? And I'm sorry that some of these are horrific, but they are real horrific. So the Rashida Tlaib, right? The only Palestinian congresswoman in the United States, I guess it's one too many, right? One Palestinian, literally, she is almost daily facing this type of assault. Now, AIPAC offered $20 million for somebody to run against her in her district. What is interesting is the person they offered $20 million actually tweeted on Twitter or X, saying that I was offered $20 million and I refused it. That's a new day in America, that actually AIPAC cannot buy someone with $20 million. Right? Then they went to another Arab guy in the district and offered him the same type of deal, $20 million. They refused. Right? Which again is a sign that we are witnessing a shift. Just yesterday, there was an article about Summer Lee in Pennsylvania that AIPAC pulled back because they saw that they are unable to see her. So AIPAC, long time ago, used to have its sway by just threatening to be involved. Now, actually, $20 million is not buying you the type of support that is there. And again, in here we support beheading Arabs, deliberate murder of innocent civilians, raping women. So this again framing the negative, and this is literally it's filled. This is another way to try to do pink washing, all right? Saying the woman who is part of the LGBTQ, she's saying free Palestine, she's supportive Hamas, and then she's gonna run with this Hamas supporter who's gonna chop her head, right? So again, this is using, trying to use the notion that Muslims are uniquely what you call homophobic, and they are uniquely predisposed to this. I guess they have not seen the history of this country or other places around the world in this way. So this is the whole notion of pink washing, which Israel spokespeople and organizers use this. And then the Wall Street Journal, right, says, welcome to Dearborn, America's jihad capital. Right, Dearborn, because Dearborn, if you don't know, it has a large Arab population. The population has been there since 1930. For whatever reason, Henry Ford brought large number of Arabs, in particular from Yemen, to work in the Ford factory, and many of them actually continued to live there. Literally, if you go from the Ford factory in Dearborn across the street, there's a large Yemeni population. The largest mosque in that area is predominantly Yemeni, with almost 10,000 people that worship in there. These are third, fourth generation. Right? So the Wall Street Journal, just because people disagree with U.S. policy on Israel, is basically calling Dearborn America's jihad capital. Right? Very, very atrocious, despicable type of framing. Now, that type of social media and type of attack makes us actually forget to have a focus on this, on what is taking place. The complete total dehumanization, the genocide of the Palestinians, the utter destruction that has been visited on Palestine. 11 universities completely been wiped out. So far, only one president of a major university in the United States that have said anything about 11 universities in Gaza completely been wiped out. Just one. All right? So again, this gets us to focus on this so we don't actually address this that is taking place and unfolding in front of us in real time. Attacking student activists, how a pro-Palestinian campus group became a national lightning rod. Now, this is the attack on SJP, Students for Justice in Palestine. So much so that Prime Minister Netanyahu asked Stephen Emerson, the investigative project on terrorism, to try to find out if SJP is getting any funding from Hamas. Right? And for me, again, thank you, Prime Minister Netanyahu, meaning the Mossad, the Shin Bet, all the intelligence can find out that there is actually none, that you ask Stephen Emerson to investigate, right? But this is a strategy to demonize the pro-Palestine movement. And student movements historically have made a difference, whether in the anti-apartheid movement. Anybody here took classes in ethnic studies? Ethnic studies was founded by students at UC Berkeley and San Francisco State. The first classes were in the plaza by students. Women's studies program was also started by protest. Labor studies was by students as well. But we don't get the sense of demonization, calling student activists as protests, as in a negative way. They had a hearing in Ways and Means Committee. Lawmakers moved to cut federal funding to colleges over anti-Semitic activity, push for federal probes of SJP and AMP, American Muslims for Palestine, which I founded, right, to try to actually have an investigation. So the Ways and Means Committee, 4-hour hearing, literally trying to demonize in the same way in a McCarthyist type of move to try to undermine the work of students and activists in the country. Legislating limits on PDS, U.S. states, U.S. anti-boycott laws to punish responsible businesses. 34 states have legislation that prohibits engaging in boycott, divestment, and sanction. I had a contract to speak at Arizona State University. They sent me the contract to sign. Item 20 says that I commit that not to speak on PDS during my visit to Arizona State University. I refused to sign the contract, and I took them to court because my lecture was on PDS. Right? So we ended up actually winning the case. And I was able to come and speak on PDS at Arizona State University. But that's not the kicker. The kicker is Arizona is boycotting California. So you could actually boycott California, but you can't boycott Israel. Right? So talk about what you call the contradictions in terms of PDS. Attacking faculty and academic freedom, the professors, David Horowitz. Now we might think David Horowitz had what's called the Student Bill of Rights. And today the Student Bill of Rights have taken another turn, this so-called neutrality in academic teaching, or position neutrality in academic teaching, which is something to say that a faculty who did all their research on a subject can give their educated opinion about a matter, which in essence is going to be really pressuring the humanities, social science in particular, to the question or issues of Palestine and Israel. Now, if we think about this notion of neutrality, I could see myself belonging to the Flat Earth Society, asking for equal time in the departments of geography, right? Or if, again, for me, some days I do like to entertain myself with some Marxist thinking of economics. I need to have equal time in all the business schools, right? Because I can't allow somebody to only advocate for Adam Smith, open market economy, and so on. But again, the absurdity of these notions tends to be pushed, because when we deal with Israel, it's a different category altogether. And people who have sound mind literally often jump and become irrational and completely inconsistent in their thought and their understanding. Creating Islamophobia imagery and defaming Palestinians in public space. These were ads that were run in San Francisco, in Chicago, in Detroit, and other places. In any war between the civilized man and the savage, support the civilized man, support Israel, defeat jihad. So again, you go into a public bus in San Francisco, and this was actually written on the side of the bus. Some of the bus drivers were Muslims themselves, having to drive a bus that is written this on it, and also some of the kids who ended up actually protesting the fact that this type of material is being placed on the buses. Now, post 9/11 framing, and this is just for us to understand, the Israel Project 2009 Global Language Dictionary. Post 9/11, the attempt to try to frame Israel's confrontation, Israel position with the Palestinians to be akin to U.S. Position and relations relative to Al-Qaeda. So this began to be mirroring the language, and Israel began to be the go-to expert in relations to fighting the war on terrorism. So Israel managed to make its history, its relations to the Palestinians akin to U.S. engagement with the war on terrorism. And therefore, the language became almost seamless in that way. Islamophobia in defense of Israel, the attacks on Ilhan Omar, which is constant on a regular basis. And Ilhan Omar is also, again, from the right wing, she's almost the nightmare, right? Because she has four things that people just can't handle. One, she is an immigrant refugee, came to the United States at age 8, and now she made it all the way to Congress. They're taking over America. That's one. Second, right? Second, she happens to be black. And as you know, anti-blackness did not disappear, it's still around. So second, she's black. Third, she wears the hijab. Oh my God. Right? She wears the hijab. We're telling you, this is just unbelievable. Fourth, which is the most critical, she actually speaks. So our understanding of trying to say that women, Muslim women in particular, need to be liberated when you talked about Ilhan Omar does not fit the bill. So in essence, they crystallize all these attacks on her. So almost on a daily basis, she faces this type of attacks on herself. Now, Zionism and academia, university president and administrators became levers in the massive pro-Israel propaganda machine and provide the lubricating oil for the structural Islamophobic campaign that targets Arabs, Palestinians, Muslims, progressive Jews, and their allies on college campuses, and in the community. University presidents and administrators provide the public relations stage and the oxygen for Israel's propaganda machine and create the conditions that further target and marginalize Palestinians, progressive Jewish voices, and the communities of color that are challenging Israel. Increasingly, university leadership uses the euphemism campus climate and inclusion strategies as a spear to hit Palestine activists on campus. The discourses around campus climate is actually started around the protest at UC Berkeley, and that began to be the framing of how campus climate. I would say the following: the primary victims of racism on college campuses still are our Black brothers and sisters. Yet the campus climate is not actually oriented to respond to them. Right? Again, this in data, time and time again, in terms of what we find. Now, San Francisco Federation's funding Islamophobia. The Jewish Federation of San Francisco and the Helen Diller Family Foundation funded far-right and anti-Muslim groups, and I can't prove it. I have 80,000 pages of tax returns 9/9, meaning what was funded and how it was funded. They funded the Project Veritas, the AMCHA Initiative, the American Freedom Law Center, American Freedom Defense Initiative, the David Horowitz Freedom Center, the Clarion Fund. More importantly, Geert Wilders, who is the politician from the Netherlands, the Jewish Federations actually funded him. If you don't know Geert Wilders, he's the one that sponsored the Muhammad cartoons, right? Of saying that Prophet Muhammad is a terrorist, and went around the country, both in Europe and the United States, sponsoring these cartoon exhibits. Geert Wilders' party is a neo-Nazi party. His members walked into the Dutch parliament wearing Nazi memorabilia. Yet the Jewish Federation actually funded him because, again, he speaks in relation to defense and security of Israel, funding the defamation of Palestinians and Muslims, protecting Israel through Islamophobia. That's why whenever the notion about challenging Islamophobia and anti-Semitism, we have to be very clear what we are talking about, and to understand that on the one hand, both Islamophobia and anti-Semitism originated in a long history. We could go back to even 1400, right? But in the modern contemporary period, conflating anti-Semitism with a critique of Israel and Israeli policy is something that we need to be often aware and challenging. Now, Israel's role in the post-Cold War era, which gets us into this notion, has its role to counter and prevent Islamic extremists and Arab nationalists, reassert its strategic value in a unipolar world, speak of common threat with the West, provide training and know-how subcontractor, expand its foreign policy reach so as to become more viable India, China, Sub-Saharan Africa, and become the go-to experts on countering Islamic ideologies and movements. So when often we talk about countering violent extremism relative to terrorism, it's often really packaged around Israel's interests, and many of these programs actually center this type of strategy. When Jewish leaders decide to harass college kids in 2015, the Jewish community strategy shifted. Leaders who favored aggressive confrontation with perceived enemies, particularly critics of Israel, won out. Jewish and pro-Israel groups, both in the US and Israel, used significant resources to direct hardline, often secretive tactics against their targets. So this is where we begin to experience this strategy that is unfold. This began an online practice called Canary Mission, which went live in 2015, targeted college students critical of Israel. Professional pro-Israel operatives posed online as college students. Pro-Israel campus groups hired top-tier professional Washington, D.C. political consultants and sent them to work on college campuses. An Israeli spy firm pitched U.S. Jewish donors with a proposal to covertly undermine the movement to boycott, divest from, and sanction to Israel. So literally, this is an intelligence operation that has been run against those who are advocating for Palestine. This is Canary Mission. And what Women's March co-chaired, if you followed the discourse around the Women's March, especially Linda Sarsour, who was one of the major organizers, a Palestinian, literally they threw the sink on her and all of the activists that were engaged in the work around the women's movement at the time. The Root Institute report 2010, in early 2010, the Israeli think tank, the Root Institute, put out a series of influential reports that laid out a theory and strategy of an aggressive pro-Israel posture. They called for pro-Israel advocates to out, name, and shame harsh critics of Israel and to frame them as an anti-peace, anti-Semitic, or dishonest purveyors of double standards. They talked about establishing a price tag, right, for attacks on Israel and isolating advocacy groups that attack Israel while organizing regular meetings of pro-Israel networks. So from a person that have received this type of attack, this is a strategy that has been deployed literally with a complete commitment from the Israeli government. Israeli Ministry of Strategic Affairs, Erdogan, however, has made clear since his appointment in May that fighting PDS is one of his main goals. As Hasbara minister, Hasbara is to inform or to create propaganda. He was also granted a pledge of 100,000 shekels, approximately $26 million, exclusively for coordinating international events to counter the PDS movement. So we're dealing with a foreign government using its resources against our citizens, college campuses, and so on, and yet nobody fails to recognize, say, this is a foreign intervention in the domestic affairs of our society. There was a Las Vegas summit, major funders of the program. This is Sheldon Adelson, who passed away, and Power Rangers billionaire Haim Saban actually had a secret summit meeting in the Venetian Hotel to try to coordinate the strategy and provide the resources. Campus pro-Israel group monitored progressive Jewish students. So not only Palestinians, Arab and Muslims, but progressive Jewish students likewise were targeted. Now I want to get to specifically how the campaign against me was part of what's called side group shape reality. I became aware of this as a result of the FBI investigating of Cambridge Analytica. These are materials that the New Yorker magazine wrote 2 articles about the private Mossad. They set up retired Mossad agents to work on this, which was the side group Project Butterfly Plan, May 2017. So they identified the groups, national impact individuals to be targeted, the stages of the campaign, and in some cases, side group operatives conducted on the ground covert human intelligence operations. I believe that my own classes at Berkeley were subject to human intelligence. I asked the university whether they have met with this. I had actually Congresswoman Barbara Lee, which I serve on her finance committee, to write to the university whether they actually met or had any contact with this group. And the university was silent. It still has not actually came through. Israeli intelligence officials insist that they do not spy on Americans, a claim that is disputed by their US counterparts. Israeli officials said, however, that this prohibition does not apply to private companies, such as Side Group, which use discharged Israeli Defense Forces soldiers and former members of elite intelligence units rather than active duty members in operation targeting Americans. Again, so when we deal with this is on the campus, activists being subject to this type of intelligence operation. FBI investigation and a Federation for Defense of Democracy official confirmed that the think tank met with Side Group, but she said the foundation did not end up contracting with them. And the research did little to advance our own. Side Group went out of business in February 2018 as FBI agents began to investigate its work. Other counter-BDS organizations have continued to operate against activists. Basin Page at Can Animation accuses him of spreading classic, quote, anti-Semitism and features several videos, including one titled, "The Most Dangerous Professor in America." All right. So again, the FBI was investigating Cambridge Analytica, and as a result of investigating Cambridge Analytica, which is using data, Facebook, and so on, they became aware of this parallel operation that was targeting activists in the United States. Jewish students saw Harvard University alleged severe anti-Semitism on campus. So America's leading university has become a bastion of rampant anti-Jewish hatred and harassment. So this is again shifting the discussion a bit from free speech to anti-Semitism rather than actually have a full critique of Israel as it's committing genocide. pressure from donors, right? Bill Ackerman has been pressuring universities, especially both Harvard and others, and trying to rally support for censoring pro-Palestine speech. Zionism, doxing, and silencing. So the process of doxing, I'm trying to finish so we could have some time for questions. So doxing and silencing that is taking place. Harvard, MIT, and Penn State. And we just saw the Columbia president. Columbia president, in the hearing in Congress, threw her own professors under the bus. Literally, the role of a university professor is to defend the academic freedom of his or her faculty member. She could express, I disagree with them, but not to actually condemn them in terms of their research. This is like literally academic freedom had no standing if that's the case. Deans, presidents, so on, their role is to defend academic integrity and freedom and not to lean on political pressure or donors to actually begin to shape the public discourse around those priorities. So we're literally seeing a McCarthyist era that are literally using the universities as a kicking can to reshape academic freedom. I do believe that the Palestine issue is also being used to contest the so-called cultural wars on campus. And those who have position on similar issues are coalescing and using the Palestine as a way to close academic freedom on other issues, whether it's in women's rights, abortion, and so on. So you could actually see this configuration taking place. Doxing campaign, doxing truck displays names, faces of pro-Palestinian students. On any given week, you'll find this truck going around UC Berkeley campus. It has the faces of students, part of SJB. It has pictures of faculty member. In some cases, these trucks actually go to the houses where the students live in other states, which tells that this is not a penny pinching operation. This is massive amount of resources. And I would say, where are our authorities? Where are our political leadership to say that this is unacceptable and this is violation of the basic underpinning of our democratic society to allow this to happen? Right? A long history of doxing. This is not new. There's been a long history of doxing that occurs. Shifting emphasis, free speech and campus safety. Free speech has constitutional protection. The university and also the pro-Israel want to shift the debate that it's about safety, where you could actually use other segments or codes of the university because it is the responsibility of the university to provide safety and security for everyone. So it's not actually coincidental, the strategy that is being pursued to not actually frame the discussions and the debate nationally on free speech. Columbia University, today or yesterday, Rabbi Eli Butchler actually sent a note through WhatsApp to his students to say not to come to the campus because it's unsafe. The university responded by actually closing all of the classes and shifting all the classes to Zoom and suspending the rights of students and faculty to have access to the university. Now, the strategy has an impact because the university wants to actually suspend the student and charge them with trespassing. So the consequence of this, anyone that stays on the campus will be charged with trespassing. And last week, the university suspended the students first, then charged them with trespassing and called the New York Police Department. So literally, as academic institution trying to maneuver around this process to silence the debate on Palestine is unprecedented. Again, if you just look at the history of the anti-Vietnam War, the free speech movement, the anti-apartheid movement, the United Farm Workers movement, unprecedented. The universities literally undermine the academic integrity of the institution just for this purpose. Calling students protester terrorists. This is Professor Shai Devedi. He literally says terrorists can do whatever. He called the pro-Palestine students terrorists. Now, you could disagree with them. You could actually say, I don't support you. You could say that whatever, but literally as a faculty member calling the students as terrorists, right? And thinking that he's actually making a point, and I don't want to read what he said to the CEO, the chief operating officer of the university. This is a faculty member, right? Using his platform, in essence, to defame and target students in that way. Now, I want to actually say that the ADL has a long history of doxing and also spying against the Arab community. I have all the files that came from the case in San Francisco when the district attorney, Arlo Smith, raided the offices of the ADL to actually uncover that they've been spying and collecting information on the Palestine Arab population, as well as the anti-apartheid movement and the Irish movement at the time. So much so that the ADL actually hired a private investigator and sent him to volunteer in the ADC, Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee, and he put the name of the ADC on the neo-Nazi mailing list in order to tarnish the committee file to say that they are actually supporting neo-Nazis, right? And the name of the person, again, if you want to know, is Roy Bullock. He was the private investigator, and he also had a relationship with a San Francisco police officer, Tom Gerard, whom he used to take the names and license plate of individuals and run it through the San Francisco Police Department record in order to have information about these individuals. Again, the ADL has employed undercover operatives in at least 7 major cities in order to target Arab Palestinians. I say this because I know that often whenever a pro-Palestine speaker is coming to campus or in any place, the ADL sends a letter, or JCRC, and from our perspective that they do not have the credibility, nor they should be at the arbiter of who should speak or not speak, because as far as concerned, ADL has stopped being a civil rights organization. It's a pro-Israel censorship organization in the United States, and their credibility has to be challenged. How the ADL Israel Advocacy Group undermined the civil rights work, and it opposed many of the elements relative to Arab Muslims' Palestinian rights. Countering Islamophobia means ending the structural silence of Muslim voices, including their critique of Israel. If you want to speak about Islamophobia, welcome. But if you cannot hear the voices of pro-Palestine and the critique of Israel, then you're not doing work on Islamophobia. You actually are doubly Islamophobic. On the one hand, you claim to try to challenge Islamophobia. On the other, you're actually silencing the voices of Muslims who Palestine is a critical piece of their not only identity, but their political speech. Political speech is the key ingredient for inclusion, key ingredient for diversity, and key aspects of challenging Islamophobia. I want to end by saying that we have actually developed an app, Islamophobia reporting app. Amna said about data. If you don't have data, right, you really did not happen. So if a tree fall in the forest and it's not on TikTok, did it really fall? Right? So we have been collecting, and we're actually in the next stage of developing the next iteration of it. We want to also be able to get access to a social media feed to be able to identify if there is a particular area where there is increased Islamophobic content, to identify what is taking place and be able to go back and find what this information and what is occurring. You're able to actually file both in Arabic and in English, right? So don't worry, in some areas if you put Arabic, then people get scared, right? This is also going again a sign of Islamophobia. So you could file the case in both Arabic and English. So thank you for listening, and I'll take any and all your questions.
What an incredible presentation. Thank you so much. I thought I already knew a lot about this subject, and I learned so much. In light of how much time we have left, we just have a couple of minutes. I have read through all the questions. I'm going to pose 2 questions to you that came up the most in the keynote cards in various ways. And then I'll just pose them both to you if you speak about them for a couple of minutes. And then I know Professor Al-Kazas has a couple of words to say at the very end as well. So the first question is, how do we combat censorship on campuses, both from Zionists and also self-censorship? You've talked a lot about doxing and harassing, and you yourself have been the victim of this. So what do we do? What's the best thing for us to do to combat this censorship? And the second question is, a lot of people ask about your either hope or optimism or predictions for the future of Palestine and the future of Islamophobia in the US and globally in light of the last 6 months and these shifts that you referred to in the presentation?
Yeah. As far as how to deal with censorship, I do believe there has to be collective effort. And I would say coalition building is a must. The same individuals that try to censor you on Palestine, on Islam, Muslims, and so on, are the same people that don't want to hear from Black Lives Matter, right? The same people that think the problem is critical race theory. The same people that think that women are too empowered, right? The same cluster of individuals. So what we need is to actually understand that it requires a coalition on campus to address a broader way for pushing and reclaiming civil society. One hand can't do it, and there has to be this effort on a coalition building. Second, you have to be tenacious. Many of us try to organize around the presidential election every 4 years. Our opposition does not wait for 4 years. Our opposition is 24/7, and what we need is similarly to be 24/7 engaged in the political work that is taking place. Third, our struggle is information intensive. And that what we need is to actually understand how to decipher information and also what are the legitimate sources of information. Because if we think about Edward Said latent Orientalism, many of us are literally devouring latent Orientalism, latent Islamophobia, latent racism. And sometimes we begin to fear each other, right? Because we don't recognize where those sources are there that needs to be engaged with. So that's very important for us. And I do believe in democratic education. We need to actually reclaim the spaces. I'm a firm believer that education should be free. Right? And it's not a theory. You know, in the introduction, I'm the co-founder of Zaytuna College, the first Muslim liberal arts college. We made a commitment that not a single student will graduate with a debt. And so far we have graduated, you know, from 7, 8 different classes. We don't allow our students to take loans. And if you open a college, it's your responsibility as an educator to go out and find the resources. If we could find resources for prisons, we should find resources for education. Right? So for me, that's part of how we reclaim, because for me, those are interconnected in that way to be able to do so. So we have to really expand our view and what does it mean. When I quoted Martin Luther King, 3 evils of society, I still believe that these are the 3 evils that we deal with. Right? Just yesterday, the Congress have passed $91 billion that we're going to be recycled into our military-industrial complex and corporate entities. When we ask for funding for education, we don't have any money. For healthcare, we don't have any money, right? But death machines, we have an open-ended checkbook, which what MLK said. So we need to actually do this in terms of reframing, and in order for us to have a larger agenda while understanding there are specific in it at this particular time. As why I'm very optimistic, I think we are reaching a tipping point. And I compare it to the tipping point that we experienced during the anti-apartheid movement. In the anti-apartheid movement, they attempted to silence the conversation, silence the debate. They wanted to sanction and arrested students, again, from Berkeley, San Francisco, Columbia, and so on. And that resulted in increased activism and increased engagement. And this coming after almost 20 plus years of utter failure, right? Meaning, if you have been in the United States since 9/11, you have witnessed almost $12 trillion wasted, right, on wars that killed, in the Duke studies, 4.5 million, right, since 9/11. And yet we have more homeless in our streets as a result of the wasting of resources. So I do believe that we're in this tipping moment that we are able to rethink both politics and to think what is possible and what's potential. And that's what I think the attempt to silence the debate is people are deeply entrenched of a worldview that is no longer defensible. Right? There is no longer defensible way that you could look at the American society. Again, I said that there is a Gaza in every inner city in America. UC Berkeley, just down the street, we have almost 3,000 homeless. We have students that don't have housing. And yet we're sending $26 billion to Israel. San Francisco, people saying it's unclean, right? Because it has so many homeless. But the question is, how did we get into that point? Right? For me, the uncleanness of people in the street is as a result of the cleanness in the corporate boardrooms. Because before we got the opioid addictions, we got the pharmaceutical companies, we got the big distributors that unleashed this opioid on the American public. And therefore, we take pictures next to a CEO that made billions of dollars by literally peddling death to our people in the streets. Close to 1.5 million Americans died of this. So I'm hopeful that this moment can allow us, because we're seeing people, young people, 35 and below, are coming out in ways that never been seen. I'm also optimistic that the pressing to say that to be Jewish, you have to be pro-Israel, and to form your identity around accepting a state that is engaged in genocide is no longer working from those 35 and below. So Jewish Voice for Peace, if not now, breaking the silence, is actually saying that Arabs, Muslims, Christians, and Jews can have a different future horizon, and literally you could see it. If you looked at the images from Colombia, they had a Friday prayer, and also they had a Jewish prayer Seder taking place simultaneously in the same place. I just came from Berkeley, where they just set up their encampment. Jewish Voice for Peace had their tents, and others have their tents. No longer we can shape the discourse in the way that both Israel and Zionism wants it, and that, in essence, for me, gives me hope that the possibilities are literally being born in front of us. I do feel that we are witnessing a new horizon, and it's free Palestine and justice is literally within our reach, and it's unfolding in front of our eyes. Politicians are the last to jump on the bandwagon. The train is already left, and they're just running to catch up with it. The train is already out, right? And it's just a matter, we are actually running the train as we speak, the train for justice, the train for freedom, the train of a future horizon. And that's given me, I'm very, very optimistic of that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Please, everyone, help me thank Dr. Bazyan again.
Thank you.
For throwing us out, we have a few words from the illustrious Professor and Dr. Bazyan. Thank you so much.
It's getting late, so I'm not going to say anything except to thank two people. One of them, this guy, Dr. Hatem from Berkeley. I know him for a long time, since he was a student in San Francisco State. And I'm not going to tell you when, otherwise you'll find out. What is interesting about this guy, he's not only pro-Palestinian. Did you hear what I said? He's not partially humanitarian. Did you hear what I said? He's very active in many, many other causes. And this is why I was attracted to him when he was a student. And he's continuing his effort, not only in Palestinian issue, anti-racism issue, a human rights issue, women issue, and many, many other issues. He's a very, very well-rounded person. Thank you for a very good presentation, very organized presentation, full of information and thought-provoking information. And every time I listen to you, I learn something from you. And I've been learning for the last, will you please stand up? and give him, well, CSUS funds. You deserve it, you deserve it. And I want to thank another person. Stand up, sir. She is the one. She is the one who took the lead in organizing this lecture. With this hard work, dedication, and commitment, she made this event possible and successful. The fact that you are here, thank you, Sahar. She is emerging as one of our leaders, as a spokesman for the people of Southwest Asia and North Africa, formerly called Middle East. Formerly, did you hear what I said? This is an Orientalist term, which I really despise. I realized that at the end of my career. I wish I realized that 40 years ago. Anyhow, and I want to thank all the co-sponsors. And I don't have the list, but thank you very much, and God bless you, and good night. Sahar, thank you.